this discussion as engaging as possible, so that way we could interact together. I'll be sharing my screen now. There we go. So you should be seeing the peer deck interface. So if you are joining from your laptop or from your tablet, you can go to joinpd.com, and then you could enter this code in your browser when you are prompted to. So kindly go to joinpd.com, and it will ask you for a code. So kindly enter the code VAHDMQ as indicated on the screen. Okay, so we've got people in already. Thank you. We'll give everyone a minute to join in. So, ma'am, how many participants are we anticipating for today's session?
They are actually 3, but they are allowed to work on asynchronous because most of them are school leaders.
Okay. All right. So I'll begin the slides, and if you are having difficulty joining, kindly follow us through your screen, and you may want to interact with us through the chat box on Zoom. All right. So as mentioned earlier, this is a presentation or a workshop or a discussion, whereas we will be talking about leadership in schools during the post-pandemic period. So how and in what ways can we address the challenges that are brought about by the pandemic or its effect? So a little bit about myself. I have been in international education since 2011, and I went into IB, which is the International Baccalaureate Program, in 2013, where I had very diverse roles within the school setting. I have been in Qatar, in the UAE, in the Philippines, and now my current position as secondary principal is in India at Mahindra International School. And I hope that during this session I get to learn from everyone as well. And again, we are trying to learn from each other, and I'd like to get to know you too. So if you could indicate what your role is at your school, so that we know who and what commonalities we have within this session. Right? So what is your role at your school? Okay. So in the Zoom box, we've got teachers, CIP coordinator, principal, subject teacher. So we have a diverse group of participants within our group today. All right, thank you. And the next one is, are you serving in the private or public sector? Okay. Thank you. This is good because even if we are all coming from the public sector, it's good to know that every context will have its own unique challenges, its own unique context, you know. So hopefully we get to learn from your expertise as well. Okay. So how long have you been in education? So the choices are 1 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, or more than 10 years. Okay. So we've got a lot of teachers with amazing experience of teaching or being in the classroom or being in the school setting for more than 10 years. Thank you. Okay. And the next one is, I'll give you 2 minutes for this. And what is your expectation from this session? So if you could please tell us one specific expectation that you have from this session. So I'll give you 2 minutes for this. And again, you could also type in the chat box in Zoom if you are not able to access Pear Deck. Okay, thank you. So if you are still typing, please give yourself about 30 more seconds to finalize your response. And as you're doing that, let's look at some of the answers that people have provided in Pear Deck. So some have said to be equipped with knowledge and relevant information that I can apply to make me be more competent and confident as a leader during this post-pandemic educational setting. This is very relevant because the word there is uncertainty. You know, there's a lot of uncertainties that are being thrown back to leaders after the pandemic, and that would also hamper our confidence in delivering our roles and the expectations from us. So thank you for that. Gaining additional data knowledge to be more effective. Most leadership style or supervisory approach in this pandemic. Expect to learn new strategies to improve my performance as a leader. I really have to continuously equip myself. Thank you. That's also very relevant, you know, continuous improvement, continuous professional development, resiliency. Being a teacher who's aspiring to be a leader, I expect to learn more about leadership in the school setting, especially about human resource management. So hopefully we get to tackle some snippets of that in today's presentation. Diverse leadership experience during the post-pandemic. And developing leadership skills to meet and connect with other leaders. All right, thank you. And let's look at the Zoom chat for additional responses. So expecting to learn more about the roles of leaders during the transition period and to know different approaches that will be functional to help teachers and students navigate the transition period. All right, so looking at strategies. And again, hopefully we get to share a little bit of those as well towards the end of the presentation. You know, what strategies, what structures can we use in supporting our community? All right, thank you. Okay. And of course, let's talk about your school setting, right? I'll give you another 2 minutes for this, or even 3 minutes, because I want you to think about this. Share at least 2 of your school's priorities when you start operations this coming academic year, 23-24. So ano ba yung dalawang important things on top of your list as school leaders or as a school community? And if you are not an assistant principal, if you are not a principal, if you are a teacher, what do you think are your school's incoming priorities? So for example, in my setting, I've already informed my team, my teachers, that in the coming academic year, our big goal is to polish our curriculum documentation. So those will be the big things that we'll be pushing ahead with in the coming academic year. So in your setting, what are 2 of your school's priorities? And again, there's no right and wrong answer for this because each context is different. All right, so I'll give everyone 3 minutes so you can think about it and you can share your response with us in the chat. All right, so 3 minutes starts now. All right, 30 minutes. Sorry, 30 seconds. All right, 30 seconds left if you're still finalizing your responses. So if you've already put in your response, thank you. I'm already going through the Zoom chat. So some have said health and school environment and academic performance, project implementation, increased academic performance of students. All right, priorities as subject teacher, academic performance of students. All right, so time's up. Let's go over bridging gaps and the losses during the pandemic and reestablish their psychological, social, and mental well-being. All right, academic performance and school environment, and all teachers prepared and supported to address learning loss among their students to incorporate digital technology into their teaching. And let's look at Pear Deck for your responses. Right, it's good to see that identifying and addressing learning gaps are part of your priority. Yeah, closing the gaps again. It's very proactive to see schools doing this because yes, especially during the 2 years, 2.5 years of face-to-face and then blended learning, you need to have a continuous way of identifying these gaps and then looking for ways on how to support the students and the teachers in the process of closing those gaps. All right, thank you. Okay, so let me go to the next slide. So just a few essential agreements about how we want this session to be. We are here to engage in dialogue. If you have questions, besides the Q&A at the end of the session, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat box, right? So we don't intend this to be a one-directional conversation. The main idea here is to exchange best practice, and to ask the question, how is this relevant to my context? Because you can't take everything I say in a very straightforward way and say, oh, that's true to my context too. If that's the case, that's easy. But there are certain times where the things I say might not be relevant to your context. So how do you contextualize the things that you will be learning from this session? And how will you be bringing that forward to your school community? Or how will you be translating that into your school community? So always ask the question, how is this relevant to my context? Because all of our school contexts are very distinct and very unique from each other. All right, so let's look at the pandemic. As we've mentioned, the pandemic has shaped education in various ways. Different countries have responded to the pandemic in different ways. There are countries which were very aggressive in bringing back face-to-face learning. So when I was in Qatar, as early as August 2022, we were already at 30% capacity of letting students in. And 4 months later, into the academic year, we were at 50%. And by April of that same academic year, we were at 100% capacity of face-to-face teaching and learning. So, in the Philippines, it's quite different. In the Philippines, it's taken a long time in order for face-to-face to happen. And during that moment of online and hybrid, there were learning gaps. There were gaps that you've identified. And if you were in elementary school, you're probably going to tell us that the gaps you've identified are on literacy and numeracy, right? So again, it's impacted the school community, it's impacted teachers, it's impacted students in different ways, to the point that in the Philippines, you have parents working on their children's module to get the work done, and that added to the gaps, right? Okay. In 2020, in the height of the pandemic, the United Nations put together this document, which is Education in a Post-COVID World. And they have 9 specific ideas that they've brought forward for public action. And And these 9 things are, in a way, um, universal, but also contextual, right? So these 9 ideas might apply to all schools, but at the same time in different ways, right? So as early as 2020, the UN has already put together this document that, hey, schools, these are the things that you need to look out for. These are the things that you will need to address as we move forward within the pandemic or even after the pandemic, right? So let's look at the 9 things. So number one is strengthening education as a common good. It's looking at it's looking at the right of the learner to education, teaching profession and teacher collaboration, student, youth, and teacher participation, social spaces provided by schools. And also, I think number 5 is also very important in different ways. We'll dive more into that later. Free and open source technologies available for learners and teachers, scientific literacy within the curriculum, domestic and international financing of public education, right? And global solidarity to end current levels of inequality. So out of these 9 things, I wonder, and this is where I want to check the temperature again, and which of these 9 things, and please don't use Paired Deck for this. Please use the chat on Zoom for this, right? Please use chat on Zoom. Which of these 9 points resonate to you the most? And you could choose more than one. That's why I want you to use the chat box on Zoom. So what are your top 3? If you were the principal in your school, which of these 9 would be the top 3 points that are resonating to you right now, because that is what your school needs, right? So I mean, you've been in school for a year now, and you were able to assess and identify the gaps already. So looking at the UNESCO's 9 points for global action, which of these 9 are resonating to your school community, or resonating to you as a school leader that is relevant to your school community? All right. So if you could let us know in the chat, right? 6, 7, and 8, 6, 1, and 5. All right. 6 seems to be a very famous one, followed by 5 and 7. Nine, 6, 3, 1. Okay. 6, 7, 1. I can see that 7 is gaining traction besides 6. So technology and science are things that you're identifying in your school. So I'm just wondering if you have a STEM program in your school. Okay, 167, 631. Okay. Okay, 126. One thing that I did not see come out so much, maybe I saw it twice or thrice, is number 5. Parang 3 beses ko lang nakita yung number 5. Number 5 is very relevant, especially for students. So especially in a time where students have been facing their gadgets, their devices, their monitor screens, students have a lag in their social development. So for example, I have grade 11 students. Yeah, I've been dealing with disciplinary cases with grade 11 students. And if you have conversations with them, one of the things that you realize is they have missed out on 2 years of social development, of socializing with other adults, socializing with other students. So parang yung social development nila, it stayed to where 2020 started during the pandemic, so it's very important that we provide. When we talk about social spaces, it could be within the classroom, it could be within the lesson, but provide students with a place, with a space to collaborate and engage in conversation. So, all right, thank you for your input. Another document, and this is not from the UN. This is between Microsoft and the Education World Forum, right? And they have given us a very relevant document. I would say relevant and purposeful document, which was published in June 2021, which talks about equity in education, right? So they've seen the effects of the pandemic. They've evaluated the impact of the pandemic and assessed its possible outcomes. And now, listening to your input at the start of this conversation, we could see that these things that are being or have been brought forward by this white paper, right, has been or is coming into reality, right? So it gave us this document, this white paper gave us pointers to look at, right, when we start planning for the year. So it talks about equity by design. So what do we mean when we talk about equity? What does that mean for students? How do we make sure that the student who doesn't know how to do a simple math equation like addition or subtraction, how can we bring them up to the level of someone who already knows how to multiply and divide? Because they're in the same classroom. How do we bridge that gap? How do we make sure that the curriculum is accessible to everyone within the school setting, right? Ensure that every student can get back to school, which is very true in many cases. Some families in the private school setting said, no, we're putting our children into the public school setting. Or some parents have decided to stop their children's education during the pandemic because of the uncertainty. So how do we bring them back into the classroom? How do we bring them back into the school community? So making sure that students have access to the learning technologies, making sure that we are planning for flexibility, looking at the fundamentals. We'll talk more about fundamentals later, and helping teachers get the training and support they need, and leveraging the help of the community. So let's try to look at these different pointers later, right? So this document is very, as I've said already, very relevant because it touches different facets of the school community. Not just the curriculum, not just students, but it encompasses that as well, right? So this document can go hand in hand with the UNESCO's document on the 9 pointers for public action, for global action. All right, so let's go into the next area of the conversation, right? So pandemic happened, all of us were forced to go online, and a lot of our operational practices have changed, right? The way our leadership and management teams have operated might have also changed. Our practices have changed in terms of what we use and how we implement things, right? So reflecting on what we've learned from the pandemic, I'd like to ask the participants in the room to identify one thing that you will keep, right? That you have put in place as a school or as a teacher, right? That you will keep, right? After the pandemic or during the post-pandemic period, right? So identify one thing that you will keep that you have put in place during the pandemic and why. So please use Pear Deck for this. And if you don't have access to Pear Deck, please use the chat on Zoom. Again, this will require think time. So I'll give you another 3 minutes to do this. All right. So please reflect and please share your insight and your input with us. 3 minutes for this. Okay. Thank you for your input. And if you're still typing, please finalize your responses. And let's see what people have shared in Pear Deck. All right. So, Community Reading Hub. Project built by our school using para teachers or volunteers assisted and local teachers in bridging the gap in literacy. All right, so you've engaged the community in this particular project, which is very good. Thank you for sharing this. So improve the 3 basic skills of our learners. Learning could still happen in various ways outside the usual classroom-based method. Yes, a lot of schools are going through that route, especially with the limited classroom resources or classroom sizes. Some schools have opted for hybrid learning because they saw that, okay, this works, right? During the pandemic, I've learned how to integrate technology in teaching and learning. I think it is high time to embrace a hybrid curriculum in our country, right? It's interesting that you're noting this because if industries have already introduced work from home arrangements or hybrid arrangements in the corporate world, you know, so if you look at education is still in that seat compliance model of coming into school for a total of 40 hours in a week, and you've got that seat time compliance, that so-called contact hours, right? So it's interesting how the pandemic has started making us question our practices. Okay, having a positive mindset, encouraging students to move forward, being resilient, digital literacy, offering social emotional support to students, right? Thank you. A lot of really good answers, a lot of really good sharing in this platform. Digital literacy has become an essential skill in today's technology-driven world, right? So we'll touch that a little bit. Let's look at Zoom. Thank you for your responses. Attending webinars, professional development, records of pupils in order to identify their strengths and weakness. Yes, you know, a portfolio system for students could also help. Or if you have a special way of tracking and monitoring student progress, that's also that will also be very helpful. Enhancing learning opportunities. Technology offers various ways of making sure that we could support the learning process, integrating educational technology tools and platforms in the classroom. So thank you. Yes, definitely what the pandemic has given us is that opportunity to fast track that technology integration needs to happen. You know, in the beginning, a lot of teachers were very reluctant, or before 2020, a lot of teachers were very reluctant about using technology. You know, so when the pandemic happened, what happened? Everyone had to adopt, everyone had to adjust, everyone had to use the technology that were available. And for those teachers who are not able to adapt, they simply had to call it quits and say, all right, this is not for me. I'm moving ahead, and I'm moving towards a different profession, or I'm retiring. So but yes, one of the things that the pandemic has really put into perspective is it's fast-tracked the use of technology. All right. So another thing that is interesting is, besides the technology, it's also given us a different mindset. You know, so the technology has given us these, or the pandemic has given us these 6 leadership paradoxes that are very I think that the word paradox is enough to explain that. You know, so for example, to be a strategic executor, so you know that you need to do things, but at the same time you need to think about the impact, you need to think about the structures, you need to think about the how. You know, so you are being compelled to both think about the how as you proceed and implement your action. It taught us how to be humble. It taught us how to use technology and engage people with a degree of empathy. So how do we make sure that we support students who are learning and who have difficulty in adjusting, especially if you have special needs learners in your classroom, navigating between 3 to 5 different softwares or applications could be a challenge. And how we address that is another challenge for us as educators. It taught us how to combine tradition and innovation together. It taught us how to use data in the classroom. It taught us how to use data-informed practice, or how to implement data-informed processes within our school setting. And the last one is, it taught us how to be global while we are within our own localities. So we have had the chance to interact with people from different parts of the world, to see how they're doing and how they're applying things as the pandemic hit, which gave us the realization that, oh, that can happen. If we were able to do that during the pandemic and link up with different individuals globally, why can't we do it now? Right? So these are the 6 different leadership paradoxes. If you are a leader or an aspiring leader, the pandemic has built these different skills within our process. So in a way, it has embedded this within our process without even us knowing it. All right. And of course, I want to tackle this a bit, since a lot of you have already brought in technology. And one of the things that has added to the post-pandemic scenario is generative AI, right? So a lot of us are probably using ChatGPT. And we can see that generative AI could be a blessing and a curse at the same time. You will have different ways by which students can use this for the better and for the worse. How it could be used for cheating and academic dishonesty. So there are different ways by which we could adapt to this, right? So what's important is look at opposing viewpoints. And back in March, we had 2 different bodies telling us different things. So for example, the New York City schools said that they will ban ChatGPT. This was back in March. I don't know if they've changed their mindset. They said it's artificial intelligence and it becomes a way for students to cheat in their essays, right? And then the International Baccalaureate, which is an international agency that delivers curriculum or that helps regulate international education within the classroom setting in many schools, said that no, children should be allowed to quote content created by ChatGPT, because that is already part of the resources that are available to them, right? And if we were in the news earlier this week, UP even added to the mix. So I think UP was the first university to actually say, this is our statement as a university. So this was out in the news early this week. And I've just cut this last 4 pointers from their communication. And I think UP is in the right step towards the right direction. It's taking the right step towards the right direction, right? Because of the uncertainty brought about by AI, it's important that we open dialogue with people, with different stakeholders. So in my school, when ChatGPT was becoming or there was an increase in the use of ChatGPT, what did we do? I had meetings with students. I had meetings with different grade levels. I had meetings with teachers. I had meetings with heads of department to see, okay, how is this impacting? And what are we doing in order to meet this, right? So there are different areas that we have identified as a school and how we want to address them. So again, what is your definition? Which brings us back to the UP statement, what is your school's definition of academic integrity? You know, how will you educate students for the use of AI? In our case, we had a special assembly to talk about these two things, to talk about academic integrity and how AI should be used within the classroom setting, right? And again, I like this quote by George Couros. Technology will never replace great teachers, but technology in the hands of great teachers will be transformational, right? So we need to keep this thought in mind, and all this has been quoted from the UP's statement on artificial intelligence, which was published this week. So this has added up to one of the challenges, especially if you're in high school, right? What processes will you put in place to ensure that students are guided, that teachers have the support, and that you are addressing this as a school proactively? Because you cannot ban this. You cannot ban ChatGPT. It is already there, right? Students will use it. Teachers will use it. Our marketing team uses it to help think about ideas. If our students use it to help them understand complex topics in physics. So when I was having conversations with the group of students, I asked them, how are you using ChatGPT to help you? Or how are you using it, period? So some of the students said, actually, it's a great help, especially if we need to learn complex topics in physics. So we easily put in the command on ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to explain this particular topic or concept to us. So it becomes a really great help for teachers. So the next question there is, which we're not going to talk about in detail now, is how will this impact your teachers' planning? How will this impact the teaching practice that's happening within the classroom? And how will this impact assessment? So look at all those different things, because this is one thing that will add up to the plate in the post-pandemic. I mean, especially now, it's already there. Everyone's used it extensively towards the end of the last school year. The key there is, how do we support teachers? How do we train students? And how do we make sure we have a definition of academic integrity within our school setting, right? And this document from UP is readily available from their website. So they have a 2-page statement on this. All right, moving on. Okay, as I've said, the ChatGPT is just one tool. If you're on Facebook, you'll get all these different prompts on different available AI tools in there, right? And again, it's not just teachers, but students have access to them, right? Okay, so I'll give you minutes to think about this. Why are we school leaders? What is the main objective of being a school leader? And if you're done responding to this in the chat or in ChatGPT, we'll give you 3 minutes, all right, to think about this. So think about, why are we school leaders? Or if you are an aspiring school leader, think about, why am I aspiring to be a school leader, right? What is the main objective of being a school leader, right? Okay, so I'll give you 3 minutes to think about this. Again, you can use Pear Deck or the chat feature on Zoom. All right, 3 minutes. Thank you. Right? Time's up. So let's check your responses. So in the Zoom chat, we have people saying we are school leaders to lead, to inspire, and to motivate others, to lead, motivate, guide, manage the school operations, provide instructional leadership in developing, implementing, and evaluating school systems, providing technical assistance. All right. To teachers to become effective and efficient in the teaching and learning process. In Pear Deck, success of educational delivery to our clients, which are the learners in our community. The main objective here is to succeed in delivering quality in education and in delivering quality education. Okay. We are leaders because we have to lead the educational community towards authentic learning in a technology-driven world. School leaders are there to lead, motivate, empower teachers towards accomplishing the school's goals and objectives. All right, we are here to serve our learners regardless of our position and designation. I am a school leader because aside from my qualifications and capabilities, I believe that it's my calling to serve and make a difference. The main objective of a school leader is to assure that learners are provided with the quality education that they deserve through competent and committed teachers, well-managed school operations, and safe learning environment. It's a very comprehensive response, and thank you for touching all the basic parts of school leadership. So that's very meaningful. Thank you. The main objective is to motivate and inspire teachers, all right? Believe in deep passion for education. Okay, a lot of very close answers to what we're looking for. We also believe in the transformative power of education and want to create an environment that fosters learning and growth. Okay, thank you. Let's go back to the slides. So, the main reason why we are school leaders is simply because we are there to support student success and student achievement. We are there for high impact learning, right? So I want you to compare. I'll give you 1 minute to go over this table, right? And this is from Eliza McDonald, and it was published in 2013. And she differentiates two areas, right? High functioning and high impact on student learning. So what do you think is the main difference between high functioning and high impact? I'm going to give you 1 minute to go through these different pointers, and then let's have a discussion on this. So, as I've mentioned earlier, we've asked the question, why are we school leaders? Or what is the purpose of why we are in school leadership? Well, yes, a lot of us were able to give really good answers that we're there to support the learning process, to support the learning environment, to provide leadership, to provide structures, to provide supports in order to ensure that we deliver the curriculum cohesively and effectively. Yes, these are all parts of the functions. They're all parts of operations. But at the end of the day, there's one main goal that relates all of this, right? It's not the position, it's not the teachers, it's not just the structures, right? All of these are important. I'm not saying that they're not important. All of these things are very important. But at the end of the day, we are school leaders because we are there to enhance, support student learning. And the main goal of doing that is because we want our students to achieve and to be successful. We are there in order to support student learning. So the teacher or the principal who said they are there, they are leaders because they want to support student and learning growth, spot on. That is the reason why we're there. You know, we are school leaders because we want to support student learning. So if you will notice, what do you think is the main difference between these two? Function versus impact. If you look at high functioning, all of them are talking about structures, protocols, things that we will do in the timeline, things that we will do in the process, things that we will do in decision making. High functioning, everything is organized, right? Everything is organized, but it doesn't answer why it's being organized. So we go to the next aspect, which is impact. What is high impact? So high impact is looking at student learning. High impact is putting the student in the picture, right? So for example, we are looking at ways of collaborating with each other. Why are we collaborating? We are improving student learning, or we are attempting to make sure that our students are supported in the best way possible when it comes to X, Y, and Z, right? So thank you, Mamagat. So it's high impact focus on the results or outcome of the action made. So thank you. So yes, thank you, Dr. Ferdinand. So impact refers to the results oriented of our roles to learners themselves. So it's looking at how X impacts students or how Y impacts students. So we're doing this because we want to see that there's a significant, considerable improvement and growth within our students or from our students. All right, so thank you. The next part here is, okay, and these are questions that you could bring into your discussion table with your teams. Are we efficient and impactful in student learning? So this is when, you could use McDonald's slides, the two tables that show high impact and high functioning, and have a discussion with your team. Are we efficient and impactful in student learning? What kind of leader are we, or what kind of leadership are we having in the school? What do we envisage to be if we are high functioning? How do we move towards a more high impact school? So different questions that you could ask yourself or your leadership team. All right. Last one on impactful learning. This is a quadrant that shows your level of function versus the level of impact on student learning, right? So there's the first quadrant, second, third, and fourth. So first quadrant would be you are a high functioning school. That means you've got a lot of amazing things happening in your school, and you can see it on your students' results, right? You could see it on student learning. You could see it in the grades. You could see it on the commitment of the students towards learning. That's what a lot of schools are aspiring to be, or should be aspiring to be. Second quadrant is high functioning, low impact. So there's a lot of systems in place, but it's not evident yet that they are a high impact school. So high function, low impact. Third quadrant would be low functioning, low impact. Fourth quadrant is low functioning, high impact. So the question that I have here is, and you can type in the chat box immediately, which quadrant is your school under? Is it under quadrant 1, quadrant 2, 3, or 4? So think about your school and let us know how you identify your school from your perspective. Your principal might be saying that, oh, my school is at a quadrant 3 or is at a quadrant 2, but you're seeing your school as a quadrant 1. So what is your perception on your school, right? Are you in 1, 2, 3, or 4? And yeah, thank you. So the next question here is, if you identify to be in 2, or 3 or 4, the question that you will, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's good to know where we are, because now we could ask our questions with our respective team. How do we bring up our game? How do we become a high impact school? How do we go from a third quadrant to a quadrant 2? How do we go from a third quadrant to a quadrant 1? So we all have different perceptions of our school. Our teams might have different perceptions of our school, but at the end of the day, it's important to know where we are. All right. So thank you. Next. Okay. I'll ask you to answer this question now, and then we'll extend it to a 10-minute coffee break or a stretching break. So what are the challenges in your school context? Share at least one example, right? So I'll set the timer to 10 minutes, so that way you could have a break as well. And then, so you can choose to answer this question now, or you could answer it while you're on break, and then that will extend to 10 minutes. So that way we could have some time to stretch, or if you need to get coffee or water, you can do so. So 10 minutes starts now. 2 minutes left from our extended time. And if you have not responded to the question, I would strongly advise if you could please share at least one example of a challenge that you are encountering in your school context. Seconds left, and while you're finalizing your responses, let's just go through some of the sharings that people have put in the chat. Right, insufficient learning spaces, insufficient classrooms, technology such as the internet. Right, difficulty in reading. So again, reading and literacy and mathematical gaps are really identified. Right, learning facilities, class sizes, resources, right? Let's look at Fair Deck. Okay, non-readers, lack of funds in improving school facilities. So there are different concerns, different problems, different challenges that are facing every school. So that's very evident from what you're sharing, and they come from either student concerns or technology-related concerns, or they arise from structural concerns, whether it's the physical structure or the time component structure. So different facets. And now let's move forward and see what are the different things that are affecting these. Right? And how can we look for a way forward in order to address them? So, again, every context is different, right? Every context is different. We have different school cultures. Our school communities are very distinct, very unique in different ways. Challenges in India might not be the same challenges in the Philippines, and the challenges in the Philippines are not the same as the challenges that one might encounter in the UAE or in Qatar. So all of us have to take in solutions on a contextual basis, right? So that's very important. I'm not here to offer a one-size-fits-all approach towards solving this, but we need to look at the different factors that contribute to them, right? There are different factors that contribute to them, and we need to go back to the basics. So let's look at some of these, right? So the first thing is, I'm citing this from the President Fellows of Harvard College in 2020. How do you manage your context? What do you need to look at? You need to look at the political landscape and diagnose that, right? Look at the people who hold the formal and non-formal leadership roles, right? Who has the formal and non-formal influence within your school setting, No? Anticipate resistance. There will be people in the group who will resist and question certain decisions that you will make. Number two, identifying your leadership team. Who are the key people who will help you move your agenda forward? And then making sure that you sustain a momentum for change. All these four things are very important. All of these four things are very, very important. But one of the things that could topple these four things is culture, right? So think about this, and you don't need to answer the question now, right? We have an activity after this. So just introspect and reflect. What is the role of school leadership in building and maintaining a strong positive culture for student learning? Why is it important for leaders to know the school's culture? Right? So as we go on in the next 3 or 4 slides, let's reflect on this question, right? All right, moving on. As we answer that question, I'm going to flash, right? And I'm going to give you 1 minute for each slide in the next 3 the next 3 slides I'll show you gives us explanations of why culture is so important, right? Or why is it significant? Why is it relevant? So there are different experts who would say different things about culture, right? So now I'm going to flash 3 of these to you. And I need you to think about which of the following explanation has the most meaning for you and write down your reasons why. Okay, so you could get a piece of paper, and as I flash each of the explanations to you, you might want to start jotting down. So I'll give every slide 1 to 2 minutes. I'll flag it to 2 minutes so you could reflect on each explanation. Some of them are short, some of them are long. So just see which of them have meaning for you and write down your reasons why. So let's start. I'm going to the first one, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes to look and read and reflect on this, right? So the first one is Glossary of Education Reform, published in 2013. This is what they say, or what they are saying about school culture. So I'll give you 2 minutes to think, and then write down what you think are the reasons why this is impacting you, or how is it resonating to you. All right, 2 minutes. And you could use a piece of paper for this. So the term school culture generally refers to the beliefs, perceptions, relationships, attitudes, and written and unwritten rules that shape and influence every aspect of how a school functions. But the term also encompasses more concrete issues such as the physical and emotional safety of students, the orderliness of classrooms and public spaces, or the degree to which a school embraces and celebrates racial, ethnic, linguistic, or cultural diversity. Right? So this is one. 30 seconds, and then I'll move on to the next slide. So again, as we move on to the next slide, ask the question, what are my reasons why this definition, or why this, it's actually not a definition, sorry, this explanation about school culture is impacting me or is resonating to me, right? What are the reasons? So explanation number 2, and I'll give you another 2 minutes to go over it, right? So this is from Culture Rewired by Grunert and Whitaker, published in 2015. Culture is not a problem that needs to be solved, but rather a framework that a group can use to solve problems. It is how we learn to survive, one generation passing down what it has learned to the next. All right. So, and then you've got these different aspects that are included. Okay. 2 minutes. So I'm going to the last one, and the last one is by Will Richardson. This is quite short, so I'll give you 1 minute and 30 seconds for this. And culture is all about roles and relationships. Culture influences how curriculum, technology, etc. are used. Given most current hierarchies, cultures bend towards teaching, not learning, right? So this is this was tweeted by Will Richardson on 14th of October 2019, before the pandemic. Right? So how is this impacting you? How is it resonating to you? So going back to our previous question, I'm just going to reflash. I'm going back to the original question, right? What is the role of school leadership in building and maintaining a strong positive culture for student learning? Why is it important for leaders to know the school's culture? So we've offered 3 different explanations, and I've asked you to reflect on each explanation and see which one has impacted you more and what are the reasons why it's impacted you. right? Because these take on different perceptions, right? So, which of the three explanation resonated to you the most? We're not going to give you 3 minutes for this. I just want you to write in the Zoom box 1, 2, or 3 and why, right? So we'll just give it a minute because you've already taken down notes while you were looking at each explanation. So I'll cut it down to 1 minute only. So in the Zoom chat box, if you could please let us know which of the three explanations resonated to you the most, 1, 2, or 3, and why. All right, so I'll give you 1 minute to share your responses. Okay, so if you could please finalize your response. Which of the three explanations about culture resonated to you the most? 1, 2, or 3? And a short explanation why. Okay. So let's look at the first one from Sir Arwin. Number 1, because students' well-being and emotional support are essential for their academic success and overall development. A positive school culture provides a supportive and nurturing atmosphere that helps students feel valued and motivated. All right, thank you. Okay. Ma'am Rosana, also number 1, having a good culture in school can promote positive learning environment. Ma'am Rowan, number 3, fostering a learning culture in which both teachers and students actively pursue knowledge and understanding can result in more meaningful and effective educational experiences. So if you're still typing, just press enter so we could see what your responses are. All right. While you're doing that, I'll move on to the next slide. All right. Just a few things that you could look at, right? What are the different things that dictate school culture, right? Or what are the different things that could influence school culture? Number 1, it's the overall climate. The external and internal factors that are permeating within the school community. The unwritten things. And then the second thing are the foundational statements. Your school's vision, mission statement, your school's guiding statements, your school's philosophical statements. And these could be equipped with norms, values, and beliefs that are part of your handbook, that are part of your whether it's a student or an employee handbook, right? These could help dictate your school's culture. The routines, the rituals, and the ceremonies, as simple as how does your assembly look like? Is it teacher led or is it student led? So how is that particular approach impacting your school culture? Who are the heroes in your school community? Who are the heroes from your student body? Who are the heroes from your teacher and staff body that play a significant role within your school community that contributes to school culture, right? So who are these individuals? So again, there are more to the list, but these are the 5 that I've cited from the Principals Training Center on Creating Effective Schools. So you might want to look at these different metrics when you are evaluating your school's setting, and different activities that you could do with your team, right? So these were compiled from Leadership in Action from the South Australian Centre for Learners in Education. So they've given different ways on how you and your team could analyze your school culture. And as school leaders, this could be some ideas that you could work with your team or with your teachers during an inset, So a historygram or a historygram, right? Allowing every teacher to recount how your school came to be. Asking them for their version of how the school has come in from 1915 up to the present, having their stories put together in a timeline. Artifacts analysis. What are the different visuals and objects that you can identify within your school setting that could help you explore your school's culture? You could sit with the team of teachers and come with a visual narrative. What are the different experiences that people have within the school setting, right? What are the different visuals that they could look at? So for example, if you ask your teachers to, all right, go around campus, take pictures of different artifacts, different practices, different learning environments, and how does that represent your school culture? What narrative are you putting together in order for us to explore and analyze the school's culture from that picture? And then the fourth example of an activity that you could do with your team would be a culture scan, right? So a culture scan would be looking at symbols in your school and then putting together an imaginary tour for new families coming in. So if you were bringing new families into the school, what are the different cultural symbols that you could share with them in relation to your school setting that reflects your school's culture, right? So different ideas that you could look at, and these are things that you could potentially do in an inset with your team. All right. The other thing that we've mentioned was going back to the basics and looking at the mission, vision, and objectives, your school's guiding statements, your school's philosophy. Because when you start targeting change, right? One of the biggest things that new principals like to do in their school setting, and I might be generalizing a bit here, but there are certain leadership traits or leaders who come into a new school setting and they just want to change things and fluff things around and turn things around in 3 months, right? But before you go into that, the biggest thing that you need to look at as a new leader coming into a new school setting would be to explore the basics. What is the school's vision, mission, and objectives? What are the school's guiding statements? Because if you align all your action points, all your operational points on the school's vision, mission, and objectives, it will be way easier for you to move things forward with the team because it is in line with the school's values. They are in line with the school's philosophies. All right. So as a school leader, right, and again, I'm citing this from the President and Fellows of Harvard College in 2020, what is your role in the school? Are you a visionary? Are you an architect? Are you a network builder? Right? And there's no right or wrong answer to this because the needs of every school is different. Your school community might be asking you to be a visionary. Your school community might be asking you to put structures in place, to design structures of support. Your school community might need someone who is charismatic enough to build the relationships around the school community within and outside the school setting, right? Sometimes you might see yourself playing the 3 roles in different times of your career within the same school setting, right? Maybe in this academic year, you are being asked to be more of an architect to design structures for the school setting. You might be asked to become a network builder because that is what your school needs in another academic year. So you as a school leader will need to assess which of these three roles am I being asked to play at this point based on my school's need, right? And you're driving change. You've all cited different challenges at the start of this discussion. And as I've said, there's no right or wrong answer because all of us will need to assess our context. And then we need to look at the temperature within the school setting before we drive change. All right. And another quote, organizational renewal is rooted to self-transformation and self-renewal. What this quotation is basically trying to tell us as leaders is we cannot give what we do not have. If we do not have a sense of self and personal renewal, then we cannot engage our community to renew towards that same renewal. You know, and this is where we have or we tend to plateau, and this is why in one workshop that I held, I was asked the question, you know, do you think it's good to have principals rotating every tenure, every 3 years? And I think that's there's a good and a negative side to that. The good side is if you are getting a new leader, a new principal within your school setting, you have that aspiration towards towards transformational growth that the new principal, that the new leadership could bring. Right? So that's an advantage towards changing leadership. All right. The other part of the discussion there is how do we organize the structures, right? And you need to think about this with your team, because a lot of the things that were cited in our sharing earlier are beyond our control. For example, slow internet connection, right? Yes, that is a major problem. But then again, the next question there is, as a teacher or as a leader, to what extent is my scope of influence or to what extent can I actually make change happen? You know, can I control PLDT's decision to change the copper wires into fiber optic wires? You know, so realistic things. Otherwise, if we do not see that, we need to assess which are the things that are within our control and the things that are beyond our control. And then we go into this. How do we organize the structures? Right? How do we organize the adults? How do we organize teachers for collaboration? How do we organize parents, your PTA? How is your PTA organized? How do you engage with the barangays, especially if we're coming from the public school setting? Now, how do we get the barangays involved in order to move our school forward towards growth and development? You know, how do we engage with the NGOs, with the different members of the local government? How do we engage with the marginalized community, so that way we could support them through our community service, right? How do we get the different leaders within the community involved? The next thing that you can ask your team is, how do we organize learning? What is your criteria for scheduling? How do you organize the curriculum? How do you organize contact time? You know, and then of course, how do you organize your own leadership team? And again, how do we define shared leadership within our school setting? And how do we use that to improve student learning? Okay. So again, all of these things, organizing adults, organizing learning, organizing leadership, yes, they are part of our roles as leaders, but at the end of the day, they all mean one thing. They are there to support student learning. All right. Okay, I'll just breeze through these slides. And again, these are different structures that you could look at. So this one is the PDCA cycle. So again, looking at data and how do you use data to identify the gaps? How do you plan how do you plan solutions, or how do you identify problems in order for you to plan potential solutions and test the solutions and check how that impacts learners? And then how would you implement that, or how would you make changes to that in the future if things don't turn out the way you intended it to be? That's why it's called the PDCA cycle, because it's a continuous growth plan, right? So if it doesn't work, what changes might you do in order to tweak, right? And again, the main part of this is the data that you will be able to collect from the ground. Data that you'll collect from assessment, data that you'll collect from surveys, data that you'll collect from classroom observations. So different ways by which you could utilize data in order to put in together a structure and system for caring. So for example, if you have a lot of disciplinary cases coming out, let's say academic integrity, maraming collusion, maraming plagiarism incidents at the school, and you've got data to support that. So what are the potential solutions? You need to meet with your team and discuss, these are the problems that we're having. How do we put, what are the different ways by which we could solve this problem? So maybe your team will say, well, we need to have an academic integrity plan in place. We need to make sure that the consequences and support for students are put in place. How do we train the students? How analyze how this is coming out. Maybe teachers and students need retraining. Right. So again, this structure, and that's why it's called structures and systems for caring, because you are using data in order to make decisions. You're not a principal who would go in there because yung grupo ng Marites dun sa isang kanto, sinabi sa'yo, ay principal, ito yung problema. No, you don't do that. You don't depend on one small group of people to give you the data for your action plan. Your action plan should be rooted on data. Otherwise, that you don't have a basis for those changes, right? The data is your black and white that would allow you to initiate changes. And then at the end of it, at the end of the implementation, you will get a new set of data that you could use and evaluate to see if your plan actually worked. All right, moving on. So this is just one model. Data plays an important role. All right. Okay. We'll just skip this. Reestablishing, enhancing systems, looking at protocols. Again, this is how these are rooted in potential problems that you will encounter during the post-pandemic period, because a lot of things are changing. Day-to-day operations, learning environment, collaboration, communication, health protocols. You need to talk to your teams about this, because right now, looking at how things are running, schools are being put at the helm of how they address their own challenges now. So it's important that you meet with your team, look at the different models, and I'll share another model with you in a bit. All right. One thing that the pandemic has pushed several schools into is what we call the egg crate model, right? All of us are operating in our own Zoom classrooms, in our own Hangout, or in our own Microsoft Teams classrooms. And what has happened is it's compartmentalized teachers and prevented effective collaboration. So the question that I'm going to ask leaders now is, how can we foster and recreate a culture of collaboration among staff? Our goal as leaders is going towards a more inclusive leadership model, where we view teachers as instrumental to school change and improvement, right? Again, it's not just me doing things my way. It's how we get people on board in order to get the school running back to how we want it to be. Another thing that we need to another thing that we need to ask is, are we fully going back to a 2019 school? Diba? Kaya nga kanina tinanong ko, what are the things that you would like to keep as a result of the pandemic? Because the pandemic has challenged us, but at the same time, it has allowed us to innovate things. right? So as you remove the egg crates in your classrooms or in your collaborative sessions, have that discussion. What are the things that we need to keep as a result of the pandemic? So for example, in my team, we have parent sessions where parents come in face to face, but we also have mini sessions that we will have online on Microsoft Team. Kasi nakita namin that, all right, why should we ask a parent to travel 1.5 hours from their home to the school for a 45-minute session? So instead of having that, then for small sessions, for 30-minute sessions, we have it on Teams. So parents don't have to drive an hour and a half to attend a half an hour session. It's counterproductive of their time. So again, these are things that we've taken away from the pandemic that we will continue to use even post-pandemic. And that's one thing that we need to prevent. Some schools, all right, tapos na, wala na yung mga restrictions ng pandemic. Let's go back to 2019. No, the pandemic taught you things that you could bring into the classroom, that you could bring into your leadership as time goes on. All right. So inclusive leadership. And okay, before I go to the next slide, in terms of inclusive leadership, how do we get other people involved? Right? Because what we're saying is we want people to be instrumental towards school change. We want to remove the egg crates, the egg crate dividers in there to have a more inclusive system. So the next part there is looking at performance and opportunity gaps. And this is where your collaboration, this is a structure that I would like to propose when you are having team meetings. What is the difference between performance and opportunity gap? So the first thing is a performance gap are the gaps in things that you should be meeting. They are based on needs of your vision and mission. So teachers who cited our literacy gap, math and gaps in arithmetic, gaps in reading, these are performance gaps among learners, right? So these are performance gaps. Opportunity gaps are things that you want to do in addition to, or things that you want to exceed in terms of your vision and mission. It's going above and beyond. So for example, okay, if your performance gap is closing the literacy gap, an opportunity gap might be, how do we train parents in order to become advocates for the school to support the students at home? Maybe have specialized trainings for parents. That's an opportunity gap, right? So once you have identified your performance and opportunity gap, you might want to use the congruence model by Nadler and Tushman, right? So it's very simple. It has 3 different aspects: the input, the process, and the output. So the input would be strategies, the resources, from your environment. What are the things that you need to do? Identifying the performance and the opportunity gaps, and then identifying the work that needs to go in there, the culture that you will need to build in order to make sure that the work is successful. Who are the people you need to involve, and what kind of structures do you need to put in place in order to get to your output? It's a very simplified model. So what are the needs based on data? What is the work that you need to do? So if you're identifying literacy gap as one of the things that you want to identify, what is the work that needs to happen? Who are the people that you need to involve? What culture do you need to build? And what structures do you need to put in place and design for teachers and students? And then, of course, what is your desired output? Yung isang challenge kanina, classroom space. You might want to use this model to evaluate how do we effectively use classroom space. And that's another thing. Are you confined in the 4 walls of your classroom, right? What are the different resources at your disposal, and who are the different people that could be key to this, right? So do you just stay in the classroom? Are there ways that you could utilize other spaces in the school? As a principal, what are the different spaces in the school that you could open up for student learning? So those are different things that you could evaluate with your team, and you could think about different areas that you might want to open up for learning to take place, right? And these the notes on identifying the different people, input, that's the challenges, what work needs to happen, where the people, etc., based on the previous slide. All right. So this is the congruence model. And again, it's very flexible. You could use it to analyze different problems that you are having in the school. And again, opening the door for more effective collaboration because you have the end in mind. All right. One thing that you have identified in your priorities at the start is mental health. This is still very relevant, right? Both for teachers and for students. While this particular resource from Emma Hepburn focuses on looking after teachers, it's also important that you need to keep a close eye on your students. As we've mentioned earlier, students have been there for 2 years with just interacting with the screen, with the monitor. They have lost 2 years of social interaction with adults. They have lost 2 years of social interaction with their peers. So that's a challenge that could lead to behavioral problems, that could lead to social, emotional, and psychological challenges within the school setting. So you need to watch out for students as well, right? But as leaders, we need to look at both teachers and students. And of course, the importance of relationship. And again, this is from the study by Jabbar and Holmes, cited in 2021 from Texas Education. And again, relationship. It's building relationships, not just with teachers, but also with the community, also with students, right? When in my first year as a principal coming into a new school, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in building relationships with teachers. But this year, I focused a lot on building relationships with my leadership team. So getting to know the people I've worked with directly. And in the following year, my goal would be to broaden the scope of that relationship building within my team members. As a small school, I have 39 teachers in my team. And it's important that we find linkages with the teachers and at the same time with the students. I know in the public school setting for a principal, it might be a little bit more challenging because of the numbers, but making ways or finding ways on how to build relationships with learners, with the families, with your PTA will be very significant. So, what strategies will you put in place to help build community and relationships? Again, you don't need to answer this question now, because for the interest of time. But another thing that you could ask yourself after this session would be to introspect. If I was going to build community and build relationships within my school setting, what strategies will I put in place? What purposeful structures can I put in place for me to build community? So one principal I spoke to in the summer gave me an idea on how to build relationships with my teachers. So because one of the things that I want to instill within my team is it's okay to be called into the principal's office. They have this idea that people who get called into the principal's office are those who are in trouble. So it's important that we demystify that perspective and make sure that the principal's office is a place that teachers could go in and ask for help, ask for support, have a conversation with their leaders. So one suggestion, one strategy that was shared with me is once a week have a department in and have coffee and tea with them in the principal's office and just check in with them and see how things are going. So having an informal conversation with them, and that could be a small yet significant step towards building relationships within your team. All right. So what strategies will you put in place in your own school? Think about that. Start listing down things. And of course, as we end the session, before we conclude, we've this is now like a funnel. You've got a lot of things that you've learned from the session, and hopefully gotten a lot of takeaways from the session. What is a thing, or what is one thing specific that you will do with your teachers and with your team after this session? Right? So we're just talking about this particular session. Based on what you've learned, what will you be taking home with you? What will be your takeaway from this session to bring back to your own school setting? And this will be an exit ticket. So I will be asking participants to respond to the chat or to the Pear Deck, chat. All right. So I'll give you 2 minutes to think about it. So please be as specific as possible. Now, looking back at everything that has been shared from the beginning of the session, what is just one? You could have three in your mind, but what is just one thing you'd like to share with us in the group that you would like to do with your teachers, with your team after this session? So I'll give you 2 minutes for that. All right. 2 minutes starts now. Okay, you have 30 seconds left. Okay, time's up. All right, let's look at what people have shared. Have coffee break sessions once a week per department in my office to share anything about their experience in teaching and learning. I usually do this for two. Thank you for sharing, Doc. And then collaboration and share what I've learned from the session. Plan for a coming school year with lots of positivity to create meaningful journey. Ma'am Zarina. So yes, definitely lots of positivity, creating meaningful journey. It's always important to start the year with a positive note. I will use our LAC session to share what you've learned from the session, and let's look at the chat. Program specialist, continuous monitoring and evaluation, regularly monitor the effectiveness of implementation and strategies and assess the impact on learning. Strategies based on feedback and data. Very, very purposeful step. Having a collaboration and planning action plan to the school year, yes. Focus group discussion and formal sharing about my key takeaways from the sharing. Yeah. There are different ways that you could do this, even with your heads of department, you know. So yeah, as you think about these different things, please remember there are different ways by which you could implement things in your own context, because again, we are looking at this contextually because all our schools are unique in different ways. All right. So in conclusion, you might have different takeaways, but from my end, if I was to summarize what we've put in, I would put them in this, right? I would put them in these 6 points. So first, looking at the pandemic, it is, or it has taught us to be adaptive leaders, right? It has exhausted us. It has exhausted teachers. But now, hopefully, we'll get to a different point where people